Hey you, and welcome. In a previous video, we had created a form component. In this video, we will use that form component to start working with form validation and also adding contacts into our contact app. So let's dive right into it. In order to work with that, I have my Firefox already open to a documentation by Chakra UI about using React Hook Form. At the time of this recording, React Hook Form is one of the best solutions that you can work with form validation. So that's the one that I'll be working with. In order to work with that, I need to install React Hook Form library into my project. So I'll head over to my CLI and just do npm install React Hook Form, enter, and that should install that for me. I'll hide my terminal. And then let's go back to documentation and let's read the code a little bit to first make sure what are we supposed to copy, because I'm not going to copy paste the whole thing. I think there may be some things that I don't need here. So after the imports, we have hook form component. So we can see that we are first going to start using the use form hook from React Hook Form, and that's going to allow us to work with some of the APIs that hook form comes with. One of them would be handle submit. So when the submission happens, what should the form do? Register, what form inputs are you trying to work with? So you have to register them to make sure the validation works. And then the form state. So we can check all the things like which form component, which input is valid, which one input is not. Did somebody touch it? Did the validation actually happen? So there's tons of options to work with. Form state keeps track of the entire state of the form. Then we have a function, which is the onSubmit function. And here, they're just mimicking a 3-second delay. That's what this new promise line is doing. It's just mimicking a 3-second delay to say that maybe it went to server and is receiving a response back, and just shows you alert right after that. So it doesn't really do anything. But notice that in the onSubmit, we received values from the form React Hook Form callback. So we can get the values here and do whatever we want on submit when the onSubmit function is called. So that's one of those things that we'll probably copy over. And then next portion of it, in the return, the whole form element is being used here. So we are using the built-in HTML form element, and we're passing the onSubmit function, and we're providing it with the handle submit that was provided by React Hook Form right there. And we're using the handle submit, and this is a query function, so we're calling it, and it will return us a function that will be called an onSubmit. So it's two functions. So in handle submit, we pass our callback, which is called onSubmit, and it will be called when the submission actually happens. And a few more things that they have used here, such as form message. So right now, if the form is invalid, if the name was not provided and we try to submit, nothing really happens. So this would be useful to say when the form submission happens, error message should show in this area versus that area. So we'll be utilizing this as well. And then for the submission in the button, we're passing it nothing. It's just making it a type of submit, and that will trigger the form submission for us. Okay, let's take it step by step. First thing, I will copy over the use form hook into my VS Code. So let's do that under contact form and auto import that from React Hook Form, and that's done. Perfect. Next thing would be, let's start utilizing it in the return. So I will wrap the whole thing in a form component, HTML form component, and move this up one line. That should work. All right, great. So now we have the form component there as well. And remember, it was using onSubmit function. So I'll pass that. And we will get the handle submit from React Hook Form. And remember, it takes a callback. So we have to create another function that will be our handle submit. Oops, like this. Great. And handle submit will receive values. Values will be type of any for now. We may start typing it later, but for now, I'll just call it any. And I cannot call it handle submit. Let's call it onSubmit. There was two variables with handle submit, that's why. There we go. So no complaints from TypeScript, and our form is looking good. Now we do have to start utilizing register. Without that, the React Hook Form won't know what it needs to keep track of. So let's start looking at the documentation for that. And if I scroll down, we can see for the input component, we can pass register. We can call the register function and then pass it as props. So whatever gets returned will be passed as props to input. So let's just copy over this line. And let's go to our input component. Let's make it so that it's multi-line. And under placeholder, I'll paste my code. And register is there. So just let's call it name, because that's the key for the contact name. So we have contact name, contact ID, and contact description. So name will be called name, and it is required. So this is required. Minimum length, it doesn't really matter, so I'll leave that out. That validation is not necessary, but required validation is necessary. So that's cool. Let's do the same thing to description. Make it multi-line. It is required as well, and instead of name it will be called description. And all this means is that when React Hook form calls the onSubmit, it will call the onSubmit with an object, something like this, and it would have name, some value, description, some value, and then we can do something with it. That's all that means. If we didn't name the register variable properly or the first argument properly, then the name on the values will be messed up as well. So just make sure these are all named properly. And of course, I use lowercase for them because in the object, the keys will mostly be lower cases. All right, let's save that. Once that is done, I think we're pretty much ready to start submitting. We do have to change the button from a regular button to a type of submit. So it actually does the form submission for us. And once that is done, let's also add the error handling in there. So I'll go back to the documentation and copy over error message, form error message. And let's put that right. I think they put it inside form control. Yes, they did. Okay, so let's just paste that in here. And again, I'm not memorizing any of this. Don't try to memorize it. Documentation is out there. Reference the documentation. Just know where to find the documentation. That's the key. All right, they are using the code a little bit outdated. I don't really need errors name and then and errors name message. Looks a little messy. We can simply just use our question marks. That will do pretty much the same thing. And let's auto import form error message from Chakra UI React. Great, that is good. It is complaining, the TypeScript is complaining. Reason why is because TypeScript needs to know that it's going to be a string. So I'll just make it so that it's toString. In JavaScript, you don't really have to do that, but in TypeScript, that's a little bit of a gimmick we have to work with. All right, so with toString working, I will copy paste this. Remember, this is errors for the name field. That's why it's called errors.name. We need to do the same thing here for our description. So instead of name, we will use description like so. All right, perfect. So that should work. Let's just quickly give it a try. Let's see if the validation is working for us. So I'll just go ahead and submit. And notice that it tells me you have to fill this out. So I'll just go ahead and submit. Same thing here. Submit. It is working. It is using the built-in browser validation. So that's okay for now. I do want to change that in the later video. But for now, this should work for us. All right, so next portion of this would be let's make the onSubmit actually do something. And for that to work, I have to create an API in our contact context to accept a add contact function. So let's go over to contact context.tsx and notice that we can get a contact by ID. We can also read all the list of contacts, but we cannot add a contact. So we need to start providing that API. So let's start by documentation first. On line 14, I have the contact context interface. That's where I need to start working with add contact. And add contact would take will take arguments, and one of the arguments would be name, which would be type of string, and description, which would be an also type of string. So that's add contact. I will pass that here. Initial value would just be an empty function. Great. And if I scroll further down, I can see that value is complaining because I don't have add contact there. So let's create another function here. Call it add contact. Like so. Let's keep it empty for now. I will pass it down so it can stop complaining. Like so. Great. Let's start accepting some arguments. So this will be name of string and description of string. And let's add that to our contacts when that happens. So in the set contacts, I'll call that, I will pass it the array of current contacts. So I'm spreading it out. And then I will pass the new contact like so, name and description. This is shorthand to make sure that I don't repeat myself. There is a problem. We don't have the ID for the contact, so we have to calculate the ID. And the ID will be calculated by using contacts.length +1. Or actually, I think context length should give us the +1. Index starts with 0, but the length starts with 1. So I think we should be fine. Let's save that. So now we have an API in our contact context to support add contact. Let's call that from our contact form. We have to use context hook from React and pass in the contact context, auto importing everything, and destructure out add contact like so. And in on submit, I will pass it the arguments that we need to work with. So in values, on submit values, this would be an object. So first value would be name and second value would be description. It's a type of object, so I can do that. All right, let's save that. I think we're pretty much good to go. Let's try something. So try something, submit. And when I do that, it doesn't really do anything here, but if I go to my hamburger icon, I can see that the try user was added. And if I click on it, I can see, okay, there's a problem. The reason for that is because I used dot length. I was confusing it. So we do need to do +1 at dot length. So let's go to contact.context, and in the length, let's do +1. So the reason why this is happening is because I have two contacts with the same ID, number 1, and that's a problem. So I'll just go ahead and refresh my browser. That cleans up my state. I'll click on new, and let's try something, submit, and I can see try something got added. Let's click on it, and now we can see it. Now notice when I type something in my add form and click on submit, it doesn't really go anywhere. Ideally, it should go to the form, the contact that I just created after adding it. So there are a few ways to do it. One way would be is that we assume what the ID would be based on the contact's length and just +1 it. That would be one way. So it sounds a little bit hacky. Another way would be to use the return value from a function that we're calling. So in this case, that would be the add contact function. So what we can do is change the API of the contact context of add contact function to say, instead of you not returning me anything, give me the ID of the new contact so I can redirect the user, right? So that way I can have the same calculator right here to say new ID would be this and pass it down to the set contacts like so. Oops, I am not providing semicolon right there. Perfect. And once that is done, I should return ID like this. All right, so that should return a value. There is a small documentation thing that I should do here in the add contact. Instead of returning void, it should return a number. And right here on line number 25, initial value should just be 0, or actually -1 just means uninstantiated number. So I'll go ahead and do -1 there. So I'll save that. So that's returning me a new ID. Let's go back to contact form and let's import use navigate from React Router DOM. This is a default export, semicolon. All right, and let's use navigate right in on submit. After add contacts happens, I will get the new ID of the user or the contact, and I will navigate to string interpolation contacts /ID. So that should just work. I'll go ahead and save this. I'll add another contact. Let's call this I don't know, Sam, same description, submit, and takes me to the new contact. All right, I'll see you all in the next video.